Hey everyone, welcome to reading class on this fine Wednesday. We're going to talk through our vocab words and then talk through what's going on in the book. So let's start on page 69. Join me, almost dead center on the page. The word is contortions. It was a word used to describe that big knot. If you go to that middle paragraph, if you look at old pictures, that paragraph, a couple lines into there, it says, "It was made of string, but it had more contortions, ins and outs, twists and turns, and dips and doodles in the brain of Albert Einstein himself." It's obviously an exaggeration or a hyperbole, right? But contortions, this is an example of where the context of the word actually tells you just what it means. Contortions, then it says ins and outs, twists and turns. And so that's what contortions are. Twists, turns, angles, right? And so this is this really messed up ball of string, right? Testimony you can find on page 70, last sentence of the second paragraph. It says about this big knot, right? Here and there a loop stuck out, maybe big enough to stick your pinky finger through. Pitiful testimony to the challengers who had tried and failed. So testimony, like these, you could see that other people had pulled on it and pulled little loops out of it over the years, right? That was testimony that other people had tried and failed against this. So you might think that was proof, right? That was proof. That was a witness to the fact. You know, as Christians, sometimes we use that word. We say we give our testimony to other people. We're witnesses to what Jesus has done in our life and what he can do for other people too. And the disciples, the early disciples, gave their testimony, their proof, their witness accounts that Jesus really was the Savior and he did die and rise from the dead, right? So that is a word that we use in Christianity a lot. It's where the word testament comes from. The Old Testament, testimony, the New Testament, new testimony, that's proof of what God has done for us. And so that's why we call the Bible books that too. Those Bible books are witnesses or proofs of what Jesus did for us. So there you go, a good Christian word for us too. The word cunning then is the first sentence on page 73. In fact, we have to even go back to 72. These are all the skills Maniac Magee would need to solve this knot. It said he would need the touch of a surgeon, the alertness of an owl, the cunning of 3 foxes, and the foresight of a grandmaster in chess. So he would need the cunning of foxes. So what are foxes known for? Cunning means the craftiness, the trickiness. Foxes are known for being kind of crafty, tricky. Creativity would be another good word to describe what cunning means. And foxes are good at that. When they hunt, they're good at hiding and sneaking up on things and being crafty or tricky, right? And so in order to solve this knot, you're going to have to be crafty, tricky, creative to get this knot untied. And Maniac Magee was certainly all those things. So describe the scene in a couple sentences after Maniac solved the knot. So it went crazy, right? There was bugles, cap guns, sirens, firecrackers, whoops and hollers, right? There's confetti falling from the sky. He got a free year's worth of large pizzas. Can you imagine that prize? That would be sweet, right? People were guessing how long the rope was or the string was, and both black and white people were there celebrating. You can see Maniac Magee has kind of brought these people together, hasn't he? Kind of a neat thing. We're at a pretty cool scene. But then the party scene got kind of dampered all of a sudden, right? Because something bad happened to Amanda. All of a sudden, Maniac started to pick up some of the pieces of confetti and noticed that all words starting with letter A were on them. So it was clear that to Maniac that all of a sudden he realized that Amanda's encyclopedia had been torn up and made into confetti. And by who? Who knows? Maybe you've got a good guess as to who might have done that. But he found Amanda sobbing and upset because her prized Encyclopedia A, one of her favorite books, had been ripped into shreds, right? And so what did Maniac decide to do at the end of the chapter? As he was walking down the street, the Cobras were following him. Remember, that's the gang of white kids, and Mars Bar and his gang were yelling nasty things at him and being all ugly and nasty and racist and not so nice to him. And so Maniac really felt like even though he did untie the knot, and for a little while people seemed to be excited about him, there were still a lot of people on both sides of town that really didn't like him because he was different, or he spent time with people of a different race. Oh my goodness, so bad, right? In fact, that's a good thing. But sadly, at this time in our nation's history, when this book is happening in, that was something that people weren't so happy about usually. And often people did make fun of people if they hung out with people of different colored skins and things like that. And so Maniac was being given a hard time, so he was leaving town. He had enough. He was fed up with it. So he was heading out. He was running away. So where is Maniac as chapter 22 begins? It's kind of funny. It says if you were a baby buffalo, it would have gone something like this. You wake up, have breakfast, You mosey on over to the lean-to and surprise, a new animal's lying in there, bigger than you, a lot smaller than Mom, hair but only on the top of its head. Obviously, it's describing Maniac. This little baby buffalo is noticing that there's a person living in his pen, too. So where is Maniac as the chapter begins? Now he's living in the buffalo pen. And who discovered him while he was there? A guy named Grayson, right? This older man who it sounds like he works in the park, right? And does some kind of probably janitorial work or cleanup work in the zoo in the park there. And so he brought Maniac to an equipment room at a band shell. A band shell is like this big, maybe picture it like a stage in a park. It has like a canopy over it, usually built of stone or bricks or whatever. Maybe you've been at a band concert. Here's my concert, awesome art of a concert group playing, right? So people in the park can sit on picnic tables or on quilts or whatever and watch a concert, right? We kind of have that at Minnesota Square Park. It's not really a band shell, I suppose, but there's steps that bands can play on. So that's the band shell, but he didn't take them to like the band shell where the band plays. There was an equipment room on the back side of the band shell, it sounds like, where they stored a lot of the equipment, I'm sure, to put on concerts and things for the park. And so that person had brought him there. Where did Maniac Magee and the person who picked him up head at the end of the chapter? So it sounds like, they kind of struck it off. Like this guy was really nice to Maniac and they seemed to have some things in common. And Maniac felt like this was somebody that he was comfortable with. And so he was really hungry, obviously. And Maniac asked if they could go pick up some what was that snack that he liked? I can't think of the word right now. Butterscotch crimpets. So he asked, can we go get some butterscotch crimpets? And Grayson grabbed his keys and they went off to do that. So we see this new person that Maniac Magee gets introduced to, and we'll see if that's someone that he feels comfortable being around and someone who finally accepts him for who he is. He's had trouble finding a spot where he can live so far, where people accept him and don't hate him because he's different. So we'll see how this new relationship goes as the book carries on. Today we're going to talk about another reading concept, and that's the idea of symbolism, something we have talked about in the past, but we're going to revisit it today because Maniac Magee has a lot of this. You might say, for instance, that the knot, Cobble's knot on the corner of the street that separated the blacks and whites side of the town was symbolism. I'll get back to that in a second. Symbolism is when anything stands for something than really what it is. So something that stands for something else, or anything that stands for something other than its literal meaning. For instance, the eagle stands for the United States of America. It's a symbol of our country, right? Another good example is a heart, right? A heart. So a heart literally means an organ in your body, right? You all have a heart that pumps your blood. But a heart symbolizes things like love or romance and things like that, right? If you say to someone, I'm going to give you my heart, you don't literally mean you're going to rip your heart out and hand it to somebody. It means you're going to give someone your love or your care, right? And so that would be another example of symbolism. Can you think of the knot from Cobble's knot and how that might be symbolic of the relationships of the people in that town? How they were all twisted and knotted and kind of ugly, and Maniac Magee did his best to try to pull it apart, right? And you can kind of see how that symbolizes how Maniac Magee's been trying to do that in this town, too. He's been trying to get the whites and the blacks to get along better, and just like he untied that knot. So I even think that knot is a little bit of symbolism in this book, too. I want you to watch in the next section that we read, 84 to 90. There's going to be some symbolism. See if you can catch it. It's going to be some symbolism with the word itch. Someone's going to get an itch, but it's not literally an itch, like a scratch, like, I got to scratch that, that's itchy. But see if you can find the symbolism that involves that in our next reading. One more thing that's going to be important to have in your head to make sense in order for this chapter to make sense is we're going to hear a character talk about baseball and trying to get to the major leagues. So here's how baseball works again. I know a lot of you guys know this, but some I'm guessing are less familiar with this. If you want to play on a major league baseball team like the Twins, if you're a really good baseball player in high school or college, you might get drafted. That means picked. But if you don't just go right to the Twins, that would be a Major League Baseball team. They would probably send you to what they call as their A or their rookie league. A rookie is like new players, right? And if you're good enough in the A league against other young players and rookies, they might move you up then to the Double A league, which are slightly better players and players who have improved a little bit more. And if you play really well there, you might make it to the Triple A league, which are players that are almost good enough to make it into the major leagues and play for the top teams in our country. And if you play really well on the AAA team, you might get called up to be on the major league team and get to play in the pros at the big stadiums where people pay a lot of money to go watch you play. Okay, so in order to get to the major leagues, when you make it to AAA, you've got to play your best. And if the coaches on the major league teams notice you, that you're doing really, really well, they might call you up to play in the major leagues. So we're going to hear about someone who made it to AAA. And then we'll see what happens if they play really well in AAA and finally make their dream of making the major leagues, or if they don't. And so we'll see how that story comes into play. And this person's going to talk about hitting the showers. In baseball, if you're a pitcher, the unique things about pitchers is they usually only play that one position. They pitch. And when they're done pitching, they're done. In baseball, when you leave a game, you can't come back in. So if someone substitutes for you, you're out for good. Unlike basketball, you can come in and out as many times as you want. So if you're a pitcher and your coach says, hit the showers, that means you're done. You probably didn't have a very good game. You pitched a couple innings and the team scored against you, and the coach took you out and just sent you to the locker room to hit the showers, to go take a shower, because your day was done and you couldn't go back in. So if you heard a coach say that, typically maybe you didn't play very well, or you're done for the day and you didn't perform the best, and so now you can't go back in the game because the coach pulled you out. So those are some terms from baseball I just want you to be familiar with, because those will come in handy when you do your reading of the section today. All right, let's read. By the way, then, our code for today, our code word is AAA, AAA, capital A, capital A, capital A, the league that you can get into right before the major leagues. Okay, AAA, AAA. Here we go. Page 84. Grayson got the crimpets all right. He bought a whole box of 3-packs, with 10 packs to a box. That was 30 butterscotch crimpets. Maniac thought he must have climbed out of that buffalo pen right into heaven. So that was heaven for Maniac. He got to just stuff himself with crimpets. Then Grayson took Maniac home. Home for the old man was the 2 Mills YMCA. He lived in a room on the 3rd floor. So a YMCA, if you're not familiar, is just like a gym club you can join to play in the gym and lift weights. And I think he kind of worked there, and he literally lived in the building. You can tell Grayson's kind of poor, too. He doesn't really have much of a home for himself. But he didn't take Maniac up there. He took him downstairs to the locker room. He got him a towel and a cake of soap and told him to take off his rags and pointed to his way to the showers. I'm sure Maniac stunk for sleeping in the buffalo pen, right? Maniac stayed in the shower for an hour. He hadn't done this since his last bath with the little ones. He smiled at the thought of them shrieking and splashing. The shower needles stung his scratches, but it was a good welcome back to town stinging. When Maniac finally forced himself from the shower, he found the old man waiting with clothes, Grayson's clothes. I called the U.S. Army in to haul them buffalo rags away, he said. They came in with gas masks on, and they used tongs to pick them up and put them in a steel box, and they took the box away to bury it at the bottom of the first mine shaft they come to. Obviously, Grayson's joking here. He didn't really call the Army to take away Maniac's old stinky clothes. He's just making a joke. But he's joking that they smelled so bad that he had to call in the Army, right? Maniac couldn't stop laughing. Neither could Grayson, especially when he got a load of the kid drowning in his own clothes. So he's wearing adult clothes, and he looks ridiculous, right? An hour later, after a minor shopping spree, Maniac had clothes of his own. For the rest of the afternoon, they cruised around town, talking and eating crimpets. So, said the old man, now what are you going to do? Maniac thought it over. How about a job? I could work for the park, like you. Grayson didn't answer that. He said, where do you think you're going to stay? Maniac's answer was prompt. The baseball room. It's perfect. So like the equipment room, right? At the park. A tiny idea was beginning to worm its way into Grayson's head. He could barely feel it as it brushed by all the claptrap in his brain. He ignored it. He said, well, what about school? Maniac was silent. Some butterscotch icing had stayed behind on a wrapper. He scooped it up and mopped it from his finger, wishing it were Mrs. Beale's and not his own. Grayson, who was not comfortable asking questions, was even less comfortable waiting for answers. I said, what about school? Top of page 86. Maniac turned to him. Well, what about it? You gotta go. You're a kid, ain't you? I'm not going. But you gotta, don't you? They'll make you. Not if they don't find me. The old man just looked at him for a while with a mixture of puzzlement and recognition, as though the fish he had landed might be the same one he had thrown away long before. Why? He had said. Maniac felt why more than he knew why. It had to do with homes and families and schools, and how school seems sort of like a big home, but only a day home, because then it empties out and you can't stay there at night, because it's not really a home, and you could never use it as your address, because an address is where you stay at night, where you walk right in the front door without knocking, where everybody talks to each other and uses the same toaster. So all the other kids would be heading for their homes, their night homes, each of them, hundreds, flocking from school like birds from a tree, scattering across town, each breaking off to his or her own place, each knowing exactly where to land. School, home. No, he was not going to have one without the other. Do you see what he's saying? It's kind of a touching part of the story, right? I think you and I take for granted that when school gets over, I know we're at home right now, but normally when school gets over, you have a home to go home to, parents to go home to, and a family to go home to. But there are many kids in our world, like Maniac, who when school gets done, they don't have a family to go home to or a house to go live in. That's a real thing. And for Maniac, that makes him sad. He just can't go to school because every day when the school day ends and he sees everybody else going home, it just makes him sad thinking he doesn't have a place to go like everybody else. Kind of makes you feel for him, right? If you try to make me, he said, I'll just start running. Grayson said nothing. What the kid said actually made him feel good, though he had no idea why. And the brushing little worm of a notion was beginning to tickle him now. He kept on driving. By the way, that worm isn't a real worm. In his head, you ever had someone say, I have a worm in my head? In other words, they've got an idea wiggling around. He's got an idea wiggling around in his head about Maniac. What do you think that might be? I'll let you make a guess at that as we start on chapter 24. I think we'll find out more about his idea on 87 and beyond. We're going to go up to 90. Here we go. They got back to the band shell just as they finished, the last of the crimpets. Grayson looked at his watch. Guess it's time to quit the job I never did today. Time for dinner, too. Grayson was joking, but Maniac was serious when he piped, Great, where to? Dumbfounded, the old man drove back out of the park to the nearest diner, where he sat with a cup of coffee while the boy wolfed down meatloaf and gravy, mashed potatoes, zucchini salad, and coconut custard pie. So, Grayson was joking about it being time for supper because they'd just gotten done, feasting on those crimpets, right? And yet Maniac hasn't eaten much for a long time. He's starving, so he's still hungry. So Grayson takes him to another restaurant. Grayson had a way of jumping into a subject without warning. It was during Maniac's dessert that he abruptly said, Them black people, they eat mashed potatoes too? Maniac thought he was kidding, then realized he wasn't. Sure, Mrs. Beale used to have potatoes a lot, mashed in every other way. Mrs. who? So notice, even adults, if they're not around people of another culture, can not know what people are like, right? So this Grayson, he's a white guy, obviously has no idea what black people are like or what they like to eat, because this is a time in our nation's history where they're not surrounded by people of different cultures. They live separately, especially in this part of the world where this book takes place, right? So Grayson wasn't kidding. He was seriously wondering if black people actually like potatoes, and Maniac's like, of course they do. Top of page 88. Mrs. Beale, do you know about the Beales of 728 Sycamore Street? The old man shook his head. Well, they were my family. I had a mother and a father and a little brother and a sister my age and a dog. My own room, too. Grayson stared out the window as if digesting this information. How about meatloaf? Huh? They eat that, too? Sure, meatloaf, too. And peas and corn, you name it. Cake? Maniac beamed. Oh, man, you're kidding? Mrs. Beale makes the best cakes in the world. Grayson's eyes narrowed. Toothbrushes? They use them? Maniac fought not to smile. Absolutely, we all had toothbrushes hanging in the bathroom. I know that, said Grayson impatient, but is theirs the same as ours? No difference that I could see. You didn't drink out of the same glass. Oh, absolutely we did. Notice Grayson maybe has a little bit of racist or stereotypical thoughts too. He's struggling with it. He's like, did you actually drink out of the same glass as a black person? Remember, back then that was more of a shocking thing that people were kind of weirded by, and today we'd say that's not a big deal, right? But back then that was a big thing, right? This information seemed to shock the old man. Maniac laid down his fork. Grayson, they're just regular people like us. So notice Maniac is actually teaching the adult that just because your skin color is different doesn't mean you're not a person or like them, right? I was never in a house of theirs. Well, I'm telling you, it's the same. There's bathtubs and refrigerators and rugs and TVs and beds. Top of 89. Grayson was wagging his head. Ain't that something? Ain't that something? Here comes our symbolism, by the way. It was after dark when they got back to the baseball equipment room. The worm in Grayson's head had long since ceased to be a tiny tickle. Here's our symbolism. It was now a maddening itch. It was all such itch worms. It would exit only by one route, the mouth. As with all such itch worms, it would only exit by one route, the mouth. He said, I was thinking, maybe you want to come over to my place. This here floor is pretty hard. He tapped his foot to show how hard. So notice the symbolism. The itch, or the itch worm, stood for an idea, right? When one thing stands for another. It's not literally an itch. It was when you have an idea in your head, it's just like you're itching to get it out of your mouth, right? That was Grayson. The grizzled gray old park hand could never know how much Maniac was tempted or how deeply the offer touched him. Neither could Maniac explain the bad luck he always seemed to have with parents had led him to the conclusion that he'd better stick to himself. So you can see Grayson's a lonely guy too, and he sees that Maniac maybe could be a good friend for him, so he invites him to stay at his house. And notice Maniac turns him down because he's like worried that, with what happened like with the Beals, that if he gets attached to someone again or learns to like living with them, something bad is going to happen again. You can see that he doesn't trust himself, so he wants to stick to himself. Oh, it's not so bad here, he said. Look, He lay down on the chest protectors, those mats that catchers wear over their chests, right, and closed his eyes. Ah, just like a mattress. I can feel myself dozing off already. And then, not wanting to hurt the old man's feeling, he quickly added, "Hey, I told you everything about me. How about you?" He pulled Grayson's coat over himself. "A bedtime story." Grayson snorted. "Story? I don't know no stories." "Oh, sure you do," Maniac prodded. "About yourself. You know, about you. Everybody has a story." "Ah, not me." Grayson was edging for the door. "I ain't got no story. I ain't nobody. I work at the park." "You line baseball fields?" In other words, he puts the white stripes on the baseball fields. "Yep, I do it. I do that. Top of 90. You live at the Y. You drive the park pickup. You like butterscotch crimpets." Grayson shook his head. "Not as much as you. I was just eating them to be friendly, so as you wouldn't have to eat them all by yourself." "And there's another thing about you," Maniac joked. "You're a liar." They both laughed. Grayson opened the door. "Wait," called Maniac. "What did you want to grow up to be when you were a kid?" Grayson paused in the doorway. He looked out into the night. "A baseball player," he said. He turned out the light and closed the door. So you'll learn more about this Grayson guy in the next section that you'll be reading on your own. Enjoy.